My name is Alexi Giannoulias. I'm the Illinois State Treasurer. I'm the Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate, and I am the early favorite for the Chicago Tribune's 2010 Man of the Year Award. That was just a joke. There's no 2010. Let's for a second remember where we all were a decade ago. In the year 2000, America was entering the 21st century with a potent sense of optimism. The economy was thriving. There were 20 million new jobs. The budget was in surplus. There was broad prosperity at home and a fragile but sustained peace abroad. I remember the excitement and energy there was on college campuses and small businesses and in our communities, how much hope there was for the future. Now, that's not to say that America at the turn of the century was perfect or that our politics always rose to meet our challenges. But it was not too much to hope, to expect even, that America was very much on the right path. And yet here we are, barely 10 years into the new century, and the American dream, that marker of progress for generations, seems further out of reach than ever before. For the first time, we wonder with great concern, will our children have a tougher go than we've had? Where did it all go so wrong? Well, it has to do a lot with the type of leaders we send to Washington. And 10 years later, after all we hoped for a new, prosperous decade, our nation is significantly off course. And a lot of that has to do with the disastrous policies enthusiastically supported by a Washington politician named Mark Kirk. Unfortunately, he is the poster boy for how Washington works and why Washington's broken. And he's got the record to prove it. As people get introduced to Congressman Kirk and his policies over the next 7 months, they'll find out what he really stands for. And unfortunately, that's nothing at all. And he certainly hasn't stood for the people of this great state during this critical time in our nation's history. Illinois voters will learn that after 6 straight months of job losses, he voted against extending unemployment benefits, saying that unemployment is not, quote, a big issue. He's repeatedly voted for tax breaks for the richest 1% and for companies that ship jobs overseas. He's cheered, let's remember, he's cheered for every single one of George W. Bush's irresponsible, failed budgets that doubled our national debt, doubled it. This during a time of great economic growth. And despite the carnage we see around us because of those negligent budgets, record unemployment, and an outrageously shrinking middle class, he refused to change his views or admit his failures. In fact, even during a recession, he voted against one of the biggest middle-class tax cuts in history. Why? Strictly for political purposes, simply because it was the Democratic President Barack Obama who supported it. You don't have to look very far to see why Congressman Kirk has landed on the wrong side of history time and time again. Just look at his campaign war chest. Congressman Kirk has taken over $2.5 million from Washington corporate interest and then voted their way every time. His campaign finance reports for the last 10 years and his voting record will show one of two things to Illinois voters. Either Congressman Kirk genuinely believes in the failed Bush economics that reward big business at the expense of the middle class, or these huge corporate PACs and their federal lobbyists simply bought him off with their campaign checks. Either way, Congressman Kirk has continuously failed the people of Illinois. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the problem. Professional politicians, like Congressman Kirk, don't think in terms of what's good for the long-term resilience of our nation. They think in terms of election cycles. They don't worry about your job or whether your children or grandchildren will be able to find a job. They're simply worried about their own jobs in Congress. And they're willing to do anything or say anything or take any cash from any pocket to keep it. It's this permanent state of selfishness and self-preservation that leads to bad policy. It's how we got an unnecessary war that exploded our deficit. It's how we got trillion-dollar tax cuts for the rich and tax loopholes for corporations that outsource jobs. It's how they justify raising their own pay while voting against a higher minimum wage. At the end of the day, it's all a game in Washington, D.C. Gambled with our tax dollars, leveraged with our children's future. It's status quo Washington, and it has to end. Since he became the Republican nominee, Mark Kirk hasn't campaigned or even talked about these issues, and for good reason. His positions and his record are simply indefensible. He hasn't talked much about creating jobs. He hasn't talked about holding Wall Street accountable. He hasn't talked about the horrifying challenges that are facing middle-class families every single day. Instead, he has campaigned on one thing and one thing only: Broadway Bank. Ask Congressman Kirk why he now opposes a cap-and-trade policy that he himself said he voted for as a matter of national security. You know what answer you'll get? Broadway Bank. Ask Congressman Kirk why he called our president this guy and a one-termer behind closed doors. And you know what he'll say? Broadway Bank. Ask Congressman Kirk if he will keep his pledge to repeal health insurance reform, to repeal a ban on discrimination based on pre-existing conditions, and to repeal lower drug prices for seniors. And you know what answer you'll get? Broadway Bank. Just about every sentence that Congressman Kirk utters these days is a noun, a verb, and Broadway Bank. So let's dispose of Congressman Kirk's sideshows and deceptions. Let's talk about the facts for a second. When I was a vice president and a senior loan officer at my family's bank, it was healthy, it had very few past-due loans, and it was well capitalized. But because of this unprecedented real estate market collapse, the family business I left years ago, along with hundreds of other community banks, banks which did not receive federal assistance, is now in peril. As many of the people in this room know, family businesses and community banks are facing challenges that most have never seen. In the past year and a half alone, 181 community banks have been closed down, compared to 0 in 2005 and 0 in 2006. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I accept responsibility for the less than 9% of currently non-performing assets that were booked while I was there. But Congressman Kirk's claims beyond that are simply not true, and he knows it. He can't attack me on my ideas for how to get us out of the economic mess that he helped create, so he launches misleading, untrue attacks. But I won't let Congressman Kirk get away from the issues. I'm not going to let this campaign be overshadowed by his negative attacks and lies, not when the people of Illinois desperately need solutions. Real families are dealing with real problems. It's time to elevate this debate. It's time to elevate this debate because these families deserve to hear where we stand on the issues. We all know what Mark Kirk has done to Illinois families. Let's talk about what I've done for Illinois families. For 3.5 years, I have been serving the people of Illinois as your state treasurer. When I was elected, I had 3 major goals. First, eliminate sweetheart contracts and insider deals and restore the faith of the people in their government. Second, protect consumers, especially college students, from the unscrupulous actions of credit card companies and Wall Street banks. And third, protect and create good-paying jobs in Illinois. Well, we delivered. Working together, we came through for Illinois. Together with workers, management, and other concerned leaders, we took on Wells Fargo and was going to pull the plug on Heartmarks. Together, we saved over 600 jobs. We stood up to Oppenheimer when it mismanaged Bright Start at a time when other investments took exorbitant losses, and together with Attorney General Lisa Madigan, we recovered millions for Illinois families. We fought credit card companies, fly-by-night lenders, and others who try to rip off consumers. We traveled the state and held financial literacy seminars to help people get a better grip on their finances. We helped entrepreneurs and small businesses get access to capital. We passed a bill that went further than any other state in the nation to get credit cards off college campuses. And on my first day in office, I ended pay-to-play in the state treasurer's office by passing the most comprehensive ethics order in the office's history. And the day I announced my candidacy for the U.S. Senate, I became the first Senate candidate in Illinois history to refuse money from federal lobbyists and corporate PACs. I made that pledge because I genuinely believe that corporations have far too much influence in the policy-making process. Just take a look at Congressman Kirk's donors and his votes, and the connection is clear. So today I renew my call for Congressman Kirk to match my standard and reject all corporate cash. While I was fighting Wall Street here and fighting to save Illinois jobs, Congressman Kirk was in Washington raking in cash hand over fist from Wall Street, from insurance companies, and from drug companies. While I was fighting for Illinois families here at home, Congressman Kirk was in Washington supporting every one of the failed economic policies that got us into this mess. He protected the taxpayer-funded bonuses of Wall Street CEOs, and he refused to enact serious financial reform in D.C. That's why he won't talk about policy. That's why he won't talk about the issues. That's why he's obsessed with talking instead about Broadway Bank and sensationalized stories about former clients and campaign contributors. This isn't a surprise, ladies and gentlemen. It's typical Washington politics. It's not leadership, but it's classic Kirk. Well, it's not going to fool voters, and it won't win this election. Now, when I decided to run, I knew it was going to be tough. Examining my record is one thing, but putting your family in the line of fire is quite another. Believe me, it's not easy. But I didn't get into this race because I thought it was going to be easy. I got into this race because too many Illinois families have it so hard. But Mark Kirk just doesn't get that. We are in the middle of a battle for our nation's identity, our nation's future. Are we a nation of opportunity for all, or privilege for the very few? Do we choose to move forward towards modern policies that empower and protect our citizens, or do we go back to an era where corporate abuses got a free pass and where the destiny of our society was determined by a bunch of Wall Street executives who cut checks to members of Congress who vote their way? To win this fight for our nation's identity, we need tough leaders, not more professional politicians. To paraphrase Thomas Jefferson, politicians worry about the next election. Leaders worry about the next generation. I am running for the U.S. Senate because I wake up every single morning thinking about, worrying about, and fighting for Illinois' future. And I realize that during this critical time in our nation's history, we need leaders who are willing to fight for causes they believe in, who are willing to make tough decisions and follow through on those tough decisions, who are willing to fight every day for families that don't always have a voice. Now more than ever, the people of Illinois need forward-thinking leaders with the fresh ideas to revamp our economy and reinvigorate our democracy. I want to go to the U.S. Senate to fight for those ideas that will land our government on the right side of history. I have proposed a comprehensive economic plan that reins in Wall Street excesses and targets tax cuts to the small businesses that are the true engines of economic growth. My plan invests in job training to modernize our workforce. It provides tax credits to small businesses to spur job growth, and it ensures that big business plays by the rules. My plan helps to ensure that the reckless activities don't take place again. And my plan gives tax relief to the middle class, not more tax cuts for the wealthiest 1%. But this goes beyond our economy. I believe that our long-term economic stability is tied to the strength of our education system. That's why we need to fully fund our schools so that every child, regardless of their race, their family's income, or their place of birth, has access to a quality education. We also need to hire a new army of well-trained teachers and ensure that everyone has access to a higher education and advanced job training. And on energy, probably the most critical challenge facing our nation. I have outlined a plan to wean us from foreign oil and create a new generation of clean energy jobs that stay right here in America. We also need to guarantee equal rights for all Americans, from pay equality for women to marriage equality for same-sex couples. And we need to seriously address the major global threats of nuclear proliferation and climate change with a clear-headed resolve that doesn't bend to political winds. We need a senator who doesn't avoid these issues so he can sneak by in an election. We need a senator who has the courage to tackle them head on. That's the debate. That's the debate that I'm waiting for. That's why I'm out there every day talking about these very topics with students, small business owners, stay-at-home moms, retirees, and others throughout the state. You know what I hear, what Illinois families really want from their government? They don't want a bailout or a handout. They just want a job and a voice in Washington that they feel speaks for them. They want some sense of security for themselves and their family, to know that their government is hard at work laying the foundation for a better tomorrow. That's the change that our nation needs. That's the type of reform that will chart a new course for our country, that will make our government work just as hard as the people it represents. And that's the change Congressman Kirk just can't deliver. The only thing he seems capable of delivering is a consistent opposition to President Obama at every turn, just to be an obstructionist. Is that the type of senator that we want? Well, that's the choice that Illinois voters face in this election in November. We can go back to the failed, reckless, Bush-Kirk economic policies that have put this country on the precipice of disaster, or we can move this country forward with fresh leaders who will work with President Obama to give Illinois families a chance at the American dream again. A fresh start, principled leadership, and a fighter who doesn't back down. As I've said before, I'm not running for the U.S. Senate to be something. I'm running to do something. That's what Illinois needs. That's what I'll bring to the United States Senate. And that's why we're going to win this race for the people of Illinois in November. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, Treasurer Giannoulias, Efcharisto, thank you very much. In case you don't know, that's the Greek word for thank you. And if you want to be invited to Alexi's wedding with his very bright and attractive fiancée next summer on Crete in Agia Nikolaos, you'd better enroll in a Greek class. And let me just take a minute to, you want to introduce your mom?
I did, but...
You did? You did already?
No, I mean, I was going to.
Oh, you were going to. Mrs. Giannoulias, all of our favorites, thank you. Okay, and just, Jay handed me a little note. There were two people we wanted to introduce who we overlooked, so we apologize. And one is former city treasurer, now the Harris banker, and one of my former students, Judy Rice. And our board member, Frank Paul. So now, we're ready to have some questions directed to Alexi. The first question comes from City Club member John Lee. What are your views on the U.S. Supreme Court ruling allowing unlimited corporate political donations?
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Let me step back for a second. I did not forget to, well, I actually did forget to mention my mom is here, so I apologize. Now I know those Oscar folks who go there and forget their spouses. Sometimes you get intimidated by all the powerful people in the audience. So, Mom, I apologize. This is a, where is Mr. Lee?
I think he's way in the back.
Okay. That's obviously a timely question. We all know that Justice Stevens made his announcement that he's going to retire. My thoughts on the Citizen United case, with all due deference to the Supreme Court, I think it was an enormous mistake. I think as a candidate for the U.S. Senate, we spend so much time trying to raise money and getting out there and getting money to get on TV and get on the radio and put together a campaign. You don't spend enough time talking about issues and working on policy and doing town halls that you would like to. Any candidate will tell you that. I think the system is broken, and this makes it even worse. The fact that a company that dislikes one of your positions, a company that makes $100 billion in profits, for example, can spend $20 million, which is nothing, and go on TV for a month just destroying you or your opponent, makes the system that much worse, and it takes away from the issues, and it takes away from the real debate between the candidates. And I think it's an enormous step backwards. I do want to say that campaign finance reform will be a priority if I'm fortunate enough to be the next United States Senator. Senator Dick Durbin from the great state of Illinois has a bill that is a common sense start called the Fair Elections Now law, which I'm fully supportive of, and we need to go even further than that. I know that Senator Schumer has got some ideas how to make Citizens United a little more feasible, but I think that case sets a bad precedent.
Thank you. Okay, and folks, on your tables there should be some City Club question cards, so if you fill them out and just hold them up, we have some staff members scattered around. We'll collect them and try to work your questions in. This is from Mary McGuire with the Chicago Teachers Union. What are your thoughts regarding the crisis in funding of public pensions in Illinois?
Where's Mary? There's the whole CTU group. Well, that's almost like a softball. From day one, as state treasurer, I've been trying to ring the alarm on the chronic underfunding of our pension system. To those of you who may not know, we have the most underfunded pension system in the United States, anywhere from $80 to $90 billion. And this is from not just 1 or 2 years of mismanagement. This is because of decades of mismanagement, decades, a lack of fully funding our pension obligations. So I have been screaming from the rooftops trying to do everything that we can. We had a bill, for example, that we tried to pass called ILPERS, where we would combine the investment functions, just the investment functions of the pension systems. We didn't feel there was a need for 3 boards. We can create ethics and transparency standards so that what took place under Governor Blagojevich never took place again. And with the economies of scale and the cost savings, we thought we could save anywhere from $50 to $82 million a year, which again won't solve that hole, but it puts us on the direction to proper management, making sure that professionals are investing the state's largest asset. We also had a bill, not to get too much into the weeds here, we had a bill that passed that makes sure the unclaimed property from our office goes to pay down the underfunded pension liability, not to be used to cover the yearly shortfall. So again, until we do something to make sure that we fully fund every year our pension obligations, it's going to be a problem. And we can make whatever changes we make going forward, we still have a gaping hole, and that's going to take tough decisions and responsible leadership regardless of how we act going forward.
Thank you. Shifting gears a little bit, we have several questions on the general area of redistricting. Do you support either computer selection, as does Iowa, or the Fair Map proposal pushed by the League of Women Voters and other government watchdogs, or the Democratic Citizens' First Amendment that would give lawmakers first crack at redistricting. So I guess the general question is, how do you approach the issue of redistricting?
Well, that's simple. I've said on the record that I fully support the fair funding, the fair map amendment. I think it's the right way forward. I think putting together a commission to determine where our districts are is a fair and important step forward, especially considering what's taken place in Springfield over the last 25, 30 years. So that's an easy one.
Thank you. This is from Steve Condren. Steve, where are you at? City Club member, what tax incentives would you put into place to bring business back to Illinois?
Steve, thanks for your question. There are a number of things that I think we need to do in Washington to help find ways to spur economic growth. Let me take a step back to say in the State Treasurer's Office, I'm very proud that we have a venture capital fund, a $90 million technology fund to find ways to spur economic growth and create jobs. We also have a low-interest loan program that tries to incentivize and encourage small businesses to get financing so that they can start their first business, expand their business, add employees to their payrolls. Going forward, part of my economic plan is a payroll tax holiday for low to moderate income workers, a job creation tax credit for small to moderate income, for small businesses that hire, within the next 90 days. The other problem that is not addressed enough is a lack of access to capital. We hear from entrepreneurs and small business owners that either can't get a loan that want to start their business. We hear from business owners whose line of credit has suddenly been closed down and they're closing their doors. And that is of grave concern to me. We've talked about another proposal of my economic plans to take $50 billion that's been repaid by TARP to work with the SBA to make sure that there is liquidity in the marketplace to make sure that these businesses have an opportunity to grow. And obviously, more on a larger scale, the thing we have to understand about economic growth, or the lack thereof, and the lack of jobs, is that the economy has changed. We all have to come to grips with that. Manufacturing has changed. Financial services has changed forever. So the question going forward is, where do we create the next generation of good-paying jobs? And it's my opinion that we have to start shifting immediately and aggressively towards clean energy. I know everyone talks about green jobs, but it's important. And not just from a moral perspective, but from a job creation perspective, from a national security perspective, from a global competitiveness perspective. We're seeing China is now the largest producer of solar panels anywhere in the world. A lot of European companies are coming to the United States and building wind turbines. These are industries that we need to be at the forefront of. I also think immigration plays a role, not to speak for too long, but immigration plays a very important role. We want more scientists and engineers and PhD students, so we allow them to come in, and as soon as they graduate, we send them back. That's not forward-thinking leadership. So there are a lot of opportunities to answer your question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alexi, and don't worry about the time. When you come back in the fall, when we have our full-scale debate with you and Congressman Kirk, that's when we really enforce the time limit. This is from Sharon Alter. Sharon, where are you? Back there in center field. Do you anticipate any debates between you and Kirk sometime this fall? Please explain whether there has been any discussion of debates. That'll be a short answer.
I'm sure there will be plenty of debates in the fall, and one of the reasons that it was so important for me to come out today, as I mentioned, people are struggling every day, and yet we're not talking about the issues. We're not talking about where each of the candidates stands on cap and trade, where each of the candidates stands on helping small businesses. We're not talking about helping people find jobs. We're not talking about social issues to see where each candidate's positions are and let the voters make those decisions. Unfortunately, the debate has been about political attacks and mudslinging, and my point here today was to elevate that debate, so we can start having substantive conversations about the issues. And as I mentioned, Sharon, I very much look forward to those debates. And I also understand there's a Cubs game, so if you sneak out a few minutes early, I know where everyone is headed. So.
Okay, Stella, you're here today? Okay. Question from Stella Black. When you first ran for treasurer, you promised support for women-owned businesses, which you have kept. As senator, what are your plans for expanding this?
Stella, you're right, and I also want to make sure my chief of staff gets proper credit. We made it a priority to help minority and women-owned businesses get their start. Through our low interest loan program, we were able to work with financial institutions. We have some great partners who are here in this room with us today that worked with us. One of the problems that we noticed is not only the lack of access to capital for women, female entrepreneurs. It's tough for them to even get their foot in the door. So through our link deposit programs, we're able to do that. We've got some terrific examples of projects in the south suburbs, in the city of Chicago, and the west side of Chicago that have worked very well. Another focus of this administration has been on financial literacy. We have a Smart Women, Smart Money program, which are always packed, where we talk about asset accumulation, spending priorities, the dangers of credit card debt, how to invest your money, retirement funds, how to start your first business, how to set it up, marketing tools, and that's going to continue to be a focus of mine if I'm fortunate enough to be your next United States Senator.
Okay, thank you. Another question regarding education. This is from John Mick, who's a school board member, District 212. John, where are you? Back there. John runs an $80 million school system. The state owes him $3 million plus. What will you do or change about Illinois education funding? And I guess Chancellor Watson and several of the other educators here would ask the same question.
Well, John, that's a great question. I think part of being an elected official and part of being a candidate for office, part of being a leader is making decisions that not everyone, that doesn't necessarily poll well politically. As I've said, that for years, the way we fund education in this state is wrong-headed and obviously inefficient. I've had some terrific conversations with Assessor Jim Houlihan, who's got an A+ program, which is a property tax swap. I think, you can talk all day about cutting and cutting and cutting the state budget and finding ways to fill a $12 billion budget hole by cutting, but I can tell you, you can cut everywhere, and I'm all for getting rid of excessive waste and spending that we don't need. We've done that in the state treasurer's office, but at the end of the day, the revenues don't match our expenses, and there's not $12 billion to cut. So as I've said on numerous occasions, I think the smartest way to deal with this problem, to find ways to fully fund our education system and to make sure that the value of someone's education and the quality of their school isn't determined based on how nice the homes are in that neighborhood, which is why I'm in favor of property tax decrease with a responsible income tax increase. I think it's common sense, and you know what, if you're going to be against that, you have to give a good explanation of why.
Okay, thank you. This is from Mr. or Mrs. Anonymous. Where are you at? Okay. What are your thoughts on the START treaty? Do you think it will be ratified? How?
Well, let me say that I think the administration has done taken a few incredibly important steps to dealing with nuclear threats that we face. First was the nuclear posture review, the START treaty, which I'll get into in a second. Of course, this week we have world leaders to talk about not just nuclear war, but the danger of nuclear terrorism. It's tough because I don't know who Anonymous is, so I don't know where to look. But what the START treaty does, I think, not only does it begin the process of reducing our nuclear stockpile, not only does it allow us to be safer by modernizing our weapons system, but along with the nuclear posture review, it shows, and it's an important step forward, that shows that our government is willing to work with Russia, which is important not just because our two nations control over 95% of the nuclear weapons in the world, but also because when you think about the challenges that we're facing in North Korea, with Iran, to show that we have a partnership and to hear the conversations between the Russian government and the administration is incredibly encouraging. So, I'm sorry, the second question was, do I think it will be ratified? I do think it will be ratified. Me being optimistic that it'll be ratified doesn't necessarily mean that it will get done. It's an election year, as we've seen a lot of senators like to say no just to say no, and that would be, I think, a huge step backward if this treaty weren't ratified.
Okay, thank you. This is from Joyce Saxon, our City Club board member over on the right. It's freedom from foreign oil. How do you see it coming, or is it possible?
Joyce, yes, and I think one of the reasons that I talked about clean energy is not just from the moral perspective that I happen to believe in global warming and that climate change is a reality, but if you look at the hundreds of billions of dollars we ship to companies that in many instances have regimes that want to destroy us and our allies, it doesn't necessarily seem to make sense that we would continue to do that. I think it's important to look at a number of options. I think nuclear energy. I think finding ways to retrofit the way we produce coal. We have a program in southern Illinois which is getting underway, the Future Gen project, but most importantly, solar, geothermal, wind, biomass. These are all steps that other countries that are ahead of the curve are taking, and that's why they're creating jobs. That's why their economies are starting to turn quicker than ours. We need to move on that quicker. I'm very proud that as State Treasurer, we started the Green Rewards program and the Green Energy program to try and look at innovative ways of encouraging property owners to retrofit their buildings, to put solar panels, soybean rooftops, finding ways to make the state of Illinois a little more green.
Thank you, Alexi, and I guess that also covered Representative Ken Duncan's question. This is from Seth Watson, the RISE Group. Seth, right over here. The President's health care bill will provide coverage for 32 million Americans. Congressman Kirk wants to repeal it. What additional steps to further this reform will you sponsor and support as our U.S. Senator?
Look, the health care bill was not perfect. No one has said it is. But when you talk about record debts and record deficits that this country is facing, the long-term economic stability of the United States, you can't responsibly talk about that without finding ways to control health care costs. And that's why when I hear elected officials and individuals saying they care about our debts and our deficit, but they voted against or not in favor of health care reform, to me is completely misguided. Not only will this provide basic fundamental health care coverage for over 30 million Americans, as the CBO has stated, over the next decade it'll reduce our deficit by $130 billion. The next decade after that, over $1 trillion. More importantly than that, I think being the only industrialized nation in the world that doesn't provide basic health care to its citizens is a moral mistake. But from a financial perspective alone, the fact that premiums have risen 3 times faster than inflation, the fact that 60% of Americans go into bankruptcy because of medical bills, and we have this notion that all these people that go bankrupt do that or get in that situation because they don't have insurance. 75% of these individuals and these families actually have health insurance. We have the state of Illinois has the largest rescission rate in the United States, which means that when people get sick, they get kicked off the health care rolls. Ending pre-existing conditions, denial of coverage for pre-existing conditions is an incredibly, incredibly important step forward. We've talked to healthcare professionals, we've talked to doctors, we've spoken to folks who have to deal with it on a statewide level, and I can tell you that's the most important step of bringing costs down, of increasing competition in the marketplace, and making sure we have a more efficient system going forward. We heard this story a couple months ago. There's a young lady who got sick, she was hospitalized, and she went to go get treatment. And the insurance company kicked her off the insurance and said she was on her own. Because when she initially filled out her insurance forms, she didn't tell them that she had braces. Braces. And this is a true story, and it happens everywhere. You hear about people getting kicked off their insurance because they had acne, or because they had a broken leg, or because there was domestic abuse in their family. Those are pre-existing conditions. I think this is an important step forward for dealing with that, for starting the process of bending the cost curve downward and increasing efficiencies in the way we provide health insurance.
Okay, thank you. We have three final questions. One is from Dave Kornecki, who's a staff member of the Illinois House of Representatives. Obviously, he's not in Springfield, so I'm not sure what that means. But since the 1960s, our state's economy has shifted from manufacturing to service industry. This shift has significantly diminished Illinois' middle class. How will your policies bring jobs back for middle class?
Well, you may have written the question after I answered the previous one, but as I mentioned, there are important steps we need to take in D.C. As I mentioned, job creation tax credits, tax cuts for small businesses, finding ways to incentivize small business owners to hire and invest in science and engineering and new technologies, and on a state level, as I mentioned, creating a more efficient tax system is an important step forward, which won't resolve these problems overnight, but it's an important step forward that we can have an impact on right away.
Thank you. And Dave, where were you, by the way, or where are you? Right over there. Great. This is from Bob Manowith, longtime City Club member. If elected, on what committees would you prefer to serve? Banking, finance, appropriations, whatever.
Bob. Where's Bob?
Bob, where are you at? You're way in the back.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for your question. Obviously, as I've mentioned, the environmental challenges that we're facing, I think, need to be dealt with immediately. There's not a sense of urgency. If I had the opportunity to serve on that committee, that would be terrific. And to answer your question, yes, I'd love to serve on the banking committee. Understanding the community banks are dealing with, understanding the importance of access to capital, understanding the FDIC's role in making sure these institutions are healthy, the relevance and importance of making sure that banks are helping small businesses, I think, provide a very important perspective in the U.S. Senate. That being said, I'm also cognizant of the fact that a 34-year-old freshman senator is not going to necessarily get their choice of which committees to be on. They'll probably put me in an office right by the bathroom, so that'll be a humbling experience.
Okay, the last question comes from my partner, Paul Green, who's out in California today, and he apologizes for not being here, but he's taking his wife to the French Laundry for lunch, okay? He wanted us to know that. It's a typical Green question. In light of the current economic crisis in Greece, have you been asked to assist in righting the ship of state?
Only Paul Green would ask that question. No.
Paul, that's good. Let's give Alexi a big round of applause.